She was 50 years old, worth $3 billion, and she had just become the punchline of an entire ballroom. He was 32, raising a 7-year-old daughter alone, and he had no business being anywhere near her world. When the host paired them together, the room didn't just go quiet, it went cruel. And in that silence, one man made a decision that nobody in that room could have predicted. He didn't look away. He didn't laugh along. He picked up his chair and moved it beside her. What happened next changed both their lives completely. If this is the kind of story that stays with you, you're in the right place. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss what's coming next. We post stories that get under your skin and don't let go. Hit like if you want more, and drop a comment telling us the city and country where you're watching from. These stories travel further than we ever imagined, and we want to see exactly how far. Now settle in. This one goes deep. The event was called the Meridian Mixer, and it was the kind of thing Lucas Carter would never have agreed to under normal circumstances. He was the kind of man who kept his weekends structured. Saturday mornings meant pancakes, slightly burned on one side because Lily liked the crunch, followed by the farmer's market on Caldwell Street, where they always stopped at the booth that sold honey in little bear-shaped jars. Saturday afternoons were for homework, or the park if the weather held, or a movie on the couch if it didn't. His life had a rhythm, and that rhythm had taken him 3 years to build from something that had once been completely shattered. He did not need a singles event. He did not need anything that required him to wear a tie and make small talk with strangers over canapes. His sister Renata had other ideas. "You've been using Lily as an excuse to avoid people since 2021, she told him, leaning against his kitchen counter with the particular expression she'd developed specifically for arguments she intended to win. "That little girl is happy and healthy and does not need you sitting in this apartment on a Saturday night." "I'm not sitting in the apartment. We were going to watch a film." "You've watched Moana 11 times. Lily enjoys it." "Lucas." Renata set her coffee down on the counter. "When's the last time you talked to someone who wasn't a coworker, a kindergarten teacher, or me?" He didn't answer, because the answer was embarrassing. "The ticket's already paid for," she said. "I'm staying with Lily tonight. You're going." He wore the gray suit he'd bought for a friend's wedding 3 years ago. It still fit. That, at least, felt like one small victory. The Meridian Hotel on 5th occupied the kind of building that made you feel underdressed before you even pushed through the revolving door. Lucas stood in the marble lobby for a moment, adjusting his collar, listening to the sound of the event filtering down from the second floor. The low hum of piano music, the tinkling of glass, the specific kind of laughter that meant people were performing. He rode the elevator up alone and reminded himself he could leave after an hour. Renata would never know. The ballroom was already full when he arrived. Maybe 120 people arranged around small tables, each set with a printed card that described the evening's structure. There would be a seated dinner, then a pairing session, orchestrated by the evening's host, a compact man in his late 40s named Gerald Marsh, who seemed to have confused hosting a charity dinner with hosting a game show. Name tags. Color-coded wristbands. A seating chart that Gerald had apparently constructed with what he described as sophisticated intuitive matchmaking. Lucas found his assigned seat and ordered water. He wasn't much of a drinker at the best of times, and this was not shaping up to be the best of times. The woman who sat down across from him was the last person he expected. He'd seen Victoria Ashford's name in the news before, not in a way he'd paid particular attention to, but her face was the kind that lingered. She was in her early 50s, with dark hair she wore pulled back with a precision that somehow looked effortless, dressed in deep charcoal. Not the showy kind of elegance that announces itself, but the kind that simply exists and lets everything else feel slightly less composed by comparison. She moved through the room without looking at anyone the way people look when they want to be looked at, and that small distinction is what Lucas noticed first. He also noticed the moment Gerald Marsh announced the pairings and gestured toward their table. The laughter started low, then spread. It wasn't mean in the obvious way. It was the kind of cruelty that hides behind smirks and raised eyebrows, the social kind that can be denied later. I was just amused. I didn't mean anything by it. A table of women in their mid-40s exchanged glances. A group of men near the bar let their laughter go a little too long. Someone said something beneath their breath that Lucas didn't catch, but whose intent was absolutely clear. He caught 2 words from the table nearest to him. A man saying to his companion, not quite quietly enough, Gold digger in a gray suit. Victoria heard it. Lucas saw her face, the way a muscle in her jaw moved, almost imperceptibly, the way she took a slow breath and straightened her posture in the specific way people do when they've had a great deal of practice pretending that something didn't land. She had been through this before. That much was obvious. It made him tired in a way he couldn't entirely explain. He'd spent 3 years dealing with the particular strain of being underestimated, of people making decisions about who he was and what his life meant before he'd said a single word. The young widower, the struggling father, the man who must have fallen apart. He knew what it felt like to be made into a symbol of something you hadn't chosen. He picked up his chair. It wasn't a calculated move. He didn't think through how it would read. He simply didn't want to sit across from her and let the geometry of the arrangement mean she spent the evening looking at someone who had just watched that happen and done nothing. He moved the chair around to her side of the table and set it down beside her. The laughter stopped like someone had cut the power. Victoria turned to look at him, and there was a moment, brief, real, unguarded, where she looked genuinely surprised. Not flattered, not suspicious. Just surprised, the way people look when something happens that they hadn't left room for. "I thought the view might be better over here," Lucas said. He wasn't smooth. His voice came out slightly more careful than he'd intended, like he was aware of the quiet around them. Victoria studied him for a second. Then something in her expression settled. "The view is exactly the same," she said, "but the company may have improved." Her name was Victoria Ashford, and she had not wanted to come. That was the first thing she told him, and he found it instantly disarming. The directness of it, the absence of social performance. Most people at events like this arrived already deployed, wearing their best version of themselves like a coat they'd pressed for the occasion. Victoria Ashford arrived as herself, which was, he was beginning to understand, a braver thing. "My friend Claire organized this," she said. She held her wine glass by the stem, not the bowl, an unconscious precision. "She's been trying to rehabilitate my social life for approximately 4 years. She is very persistent." "My sister's been working on mine for about 3, Lucas said. "What's her strategy?" "This particular one involved paying for the ticket before telling me about it." Victoria's mouth curved. Not quite a smile yet. Something more measured. "Claire sent a car, so that I wouldn't have an excuse to turn around." "Effective," Lucas said. "Infuriating," she agreed. "But yes." The dinner service had begun around them, and the noise level in the room was climbing back to something approaching normal. People had resumed their own conversations, though Lucas was aware of eyes coming back to their table with a frequency that would have been uncomfortable if he'd allowed himself to think about it. He chose not to. "I heard what that man said," Victoria told him after a moment. Her voice was level. "The one near the bar." "So did I." "You didn't have to do that. Move the chair." "I know." She looked at him. "Most people at these things have an agenda." "What's yours?" Lucas asked. She seemed briefly caught off guard by the directness. Then she said honestly, "I was hoping to have one conversation that didn't require me to explain or justify my existence. That's the full scope of it." "That's a reasonable thing to want," he said. "And you?" He thought about it genuinely, instead of reaching for the polished answer. "My daughter's name is Lily. She's 7. I think I came here because I forgot what it felt like to be around adults who weren't connected to her school or my office." "How long have you been raising her alone?" 3 years. He paused. "Her mother, my wife, died of a brain aneurysm. It was fast. There was no warning, which sounds like it should be easier, but it isn't." Victoria was quiet for a moment. She didn't reach for one of the standard responses. "I'm so sorry," delivered too quickly, the reflexive condolence that fills space but carries nothing. She simply let the weight of what he'd said stay in the air for a moment, which was, in its way, the most respectful thing she could have done. "I can imagine that it isn't," she said finally, not having time to say anything. "Her name was Claire, actually," Lucas said. "My wife." He registered the coincidence a beat after he said it, and laughed. A small, genuine sound. "Which is strange, given where we are." "The universe has a limited imagination," Victoria said. They ate without performing for each other, which was rarer than it should have been. He learned that she'd built the Ashford Foundation over 17 years, working primarily in pediatric health initiatives across underserved communities. Not the kind of philanthropic work that got announced at galas, but the grinding, granular kind that meant spending a week in a rural Mississippi hospital reviewing funding shortfalls and eating bad vending machine coffee. He learned that she read history in the evenings, that she could not tolerate imprecise language, and that she had a running argument with a colleague about the most underrated decade in American architecture. She learned that he'd been a structural engineer before Claire died, and that he'd taken a reduced contract position afterward because the full-time hours made it impossible to be home before Lily's bedtime. She learned that Lily had strong opinions about fonts, specifically that Times New Roman was depressing, and that Lucas had been teaching himself to cook with mixed results, the most notable failure being a chicken marsala that had somehow ended up with the consistency of cement. "How does this chicken become cement?" Victoria asked. "I have no idea," he said. "I've thought about it a great deal." "Did you follow a recipe?" Several simultaneously. "That's your problem." "That's what Renata said." "Your sister sounds sensible." "Don't tell her I agreed." It was easy in a way that neither of them had expected, and because neither of them had expected it, they were both slightly wary of it, in the way people get when something feels too uncomplicated. Easy had a way of curdling. They both knew that. But there was something underneath the ease that wasn't quite either of them, that lived in the space between what was said and what wasn't. A kind of recognition, the specific feeling of sitting across from someone who has also been standing outside something they can't fully name, carrying a weight they've learned not to mention, because mentioning it makes people uncomfortable. At some point she said, almost to herself, "I keep waiting for the conversation to turn." To what? The foundation, the money. People tend to arrive there eventually. She said it without bitterness, just weariness. They start by asking about my work, and they mean it at first, and then somewhere in the third or fourth exchange, it shifts, and you can see the thing underneath. What can you do for me? What door can you open? She turned the wine glass in her fingers. It becomes very easy to recognize. "Has this conversation turned?" Lucas asked. She considered. "No. I'll try to keep it that way." "I appreciate that. Though you should know that even attempting it won't protect you from the assumption." She nodded almost imperceptibly toward the room around them. "Half this room already has an opinion about what you want from me. Half this room watched you get treated like a joke and said nothing," Lucas said. And he didn't say it loudly, but he didn't soften it either. "I don't know that their opinions should carry a lot of weight." Victoria looked at him. Then she said very quietly, "No, I don't suppose they should." Later, when Gerald Marsh announced a brief networking intermission and the room rearranged itself, a man from the table where the laughter had started drifted past and made a comment, aimed at Lucas, not quite loud enough to be a confrontation, about the benefits of strategic seating. Lucas looked at him steadily. "I didn't catch that." The man smiled the way men smile when they want to look like they're joking while they're not joking. "Just saying you've got good instincts, knowing where to sit." "I sat next to someone the room was laughing at," Lucas said. "It didn't seem that complicated." The man's smile tightened. He moved on. Victoria said nothing. She was watching a painting on the far wall. Abstract, large, deep blue gradients, with the particular look of someone giving themselves a moment. "You didn't have to do that either," she said, not turning. "I know," Lucas said again. "You seem to do a lot of things you don't have to do." "Lily says it's my most annoying quality." Victoria turned, and this time it was a full smile, not constructed, not calibrated, just there. It made her look younger and older at the same time, the way real expressions tend to. "She sounds like someone worth knowing," Victoria said. "She is," Lucas said. "She's the best person I've ever met, and I'm including everyone I've known for more than a decade." That's a significant endorsement. She's earned it. They were still talking when the event officially wound down around them, staff beginning the quiet process of clearing tables. Neither of them had noticed the time. Neither of them had noticed the room thinning. What Lucas would remember, later, was not the chair, and not the laughter, and not the man with the smile that didn't reach his eyes. What he would remember was a woman sitting in a room full of people who had already decided what she was, and the specific private quality of relief that moved across her face when she understood that the man beside her had not. He had not decided anything yet. That was, it turned out, one of the rarest things she had ever been offered. Outside, the city was cold and blue lit, and full of its own noise. Neither of them was ready for it quite yet. The cafe was called Harlow's, and it was the kind of place that had no business being as good as it was, tucked between a dry cleaner and a phone repair shop on Mercer Street, with a hand-painted sign above the door that someone had clearly done themselves, and not particularly well. Inside it was warm in the specific way of places that have absorbed years of other people's conversations. The walls close enough that you could hear the person at the next table if you weren't careful. The lighting low enough that nobody looked quite as tired as they probably were. Victoria had suggested it. That surprised him. He'd expected, if they were going to continue the evening at all, which he hadn't assumed, that she would know some quiet, expensive place where the staff knew her name and the menus had no prices. Instead, she'd stopped on the sidewalk outside the Meridian, pulled her coat tighter against the November cold, and said, "There's a cafe 2 blocks over that makes decent coffee at this hour, if you don't have to be somewhere." He didn't have to be somewhere. Renata was at the apartment. Lily would be asleep by now, tucked into the particular arrangement of stuffed animals she required. The rabbit on the left, the elephant at the foot, and the small cloth bear she'd named Gerald for reasons she had never satisfactorily explained. And Renata would be on the couch watching something she'd never admit to enjoying. "Lead the way," he said. They walked the 2 blocks, not talking very much, which should have been awkward and wasn't. The city made noise around them, a cab leaning on its horn somewhere to the south, music from an open bar door, the particular percussion of a city that doesn't fully stop, and they moved through it with their own quiet intact. At Harlow's, they took a corner table. Victoria ordered black coffee without consulting the menu. Lucas ordered the same because he genuinely wanted it, and also because there was something in the act of ordering the same thing that felt, obscurely, like a small declaration of not performing for each other. The waitress, a young woman with tired eyes and ink on her wrist, brought them the cups without ceremony and left them to it. "Better than the Meridian?" Lucas asked. Victoria wrapped both hands around the cup. "Considerably." "What was your read on tonight?" She thought about it honestly. He was already beginning to notice that she didn't answer questions reflexively. She took a moment, assembled something real, and then offered it. It was a quality he associated with people who had been badly misread often enough that they'd learned to be precise. "Gerald Marsh," she said, "is a man who has mistaken orchestration for connection. The whole event was designed to create the appearance of something genuine while removing every condition under which genuine things actually happen." She paused. "The food was adequate." Lucas laughed. It came out more fully than he'd intended, a real laugh, not the polite kind. "The food was fine," he agreed, "though I've had better chicken." "Anyone who has cooked chicken even once has had better chicken." "Mine cement level bad excluded?" "Yours cement level bad excluded," she said, and there was that almost smile again, the one that took a moment to arrive and meant more for it. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. Outside the window, the street moved in its slow, late evening way. A couple walking close together, a man in a delivery jacket locking up his bike, the ordinary machinery of a city winding toward midnight. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask." "What actually brought you tonight? Not what you told me about Claire in the car. What actually brought you?" Victoria was quiet for a moment. She looked at the coffee cup, then out the window, then back at him. A small circuit that he understood was not evasion, but the real process of locating an honest answer. "Exhaustion," she said finally. "The specific kind that comes from spending too many evenings in the same 4 rooms. My apartment it's a beautiful apartment. I've put real thought into it over the years. Good light, good art, books I've actually read." She stopped. "And it is very, very quiet at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night." "I know that quiet," Lucas said. "I imagine you do, though you have Lily." "I do," he nodded. "But there's a different kind of quiet that settles in after she's asleep, when you've done the dishes and the lunches are packed for Monday and there's nothing left that specifically needs you." He looked at the table. "That quiet has a particular weight to it." "Yes," Victoria said, "that's exactly what it is. A weight." They sat with that for a moment without either of them rushing to fill it, which was its own kind of comfort. "Claire, my wife Claire." "She was loud," Lucas said. "Not in an aggressive way. She just had a lot of sound around her. She'd narrate the grocery store, she'd sing in the car and not care if she was off key, which she often was." He smiled at something that wasn't in the room. When she died, the apartment got so quiet that I started leaving the television on just to have something in the air. I did that for almost a year before I noticed I wasn't watching any of it. How did you stop? Lily started asking why the TV was always on when nobody was watching it. 7-year-olds don't let you get away with much. Victoria smiled fully for a second. Not the restrained almost smile, but the actual one. And then it settled back into something quieter. She sounds like she's kept you honest. She keeps me functional, Lucas said, which is different. Honest, I'm still working on. Most people aren't working on it at all, Victoria said. That puts you ahead. He looked at her. How long have you been alone? That depends on how you count it. She considered. Formally, for about 12 years. My marriage ended. It was a long ending, the kind that takes longer than the actual relationship deserved. And before that, even within it, there was a version of alone that nobody outside a marriage quite understands. She turned the cup again. The loneliness that exists in a room with another person is its own particular species. I think I got lucky there, Lucas said. With Claire. We didn't have long, but what we had it was real. We argued about real things. She was stubborn about real things. She didn't pretend to feel things she didn't feel. Those are the things you miss when they're gone. The stubbornness especially, he said. I'd give a lot for one more argument about something that doesn't matter. Victoria looked at him steadily. What do you argue about now? With yourself, I mean. The 3 a.m. version. It was a precise question, the kind that could have felt intrusive, and instead felt like the opposite. Like being handed a door you weren't sure you wanted to open, but were glad someone had thought to offer it. Whether I'm doing enough, he said. That's the one that runs most nights. Whether Lily has what she needs. Whether I'm being her father or just managing her logistics. Whether there's a version of this where she doesn't carry the weight of it. Having a mother she barely remembers. A father who is trying very hard and still gets it wrong more than he'd like. Does she seem like she's carrying weight? Sometimes? He was honest about it. She's adaptable in a way that worries me a little. Kids who've had to adjust to something big too young, they develop a kind of competence that isn't entirely healthy. She figures out what a room needs very quickly. She adjusts herself to it. He paused. I don't want her spending her whole childhood being easy to manage. That's a perceptive thing to worry about, Victoria said. Most parents would be relieved by an easy child. Most parents haven't watched a 7-year-old decide not to mention that she misses her mother because she thinks it'll upset her father. Victoria went still. She did that? She mentioned it once, maybe a year after Claire died. Said she missed her mom, then immediately said, but it's okay. I know you're sad too. And I thought, that's not what she should have to do. She should be allowed to just miss her. What did you say? I told her that she was right to miss her, and that I was sad too, and that both of those things could be true at the same time, and that neither of them needed to protect the other. He paused. And then we made the terrible chicken marsala because she wanted to help me cook, and I thought it would be a good distraction. Victoria was quiet. Her expression was not the expression of someone performing sympathy. It was the expression of someone genuinely moved, genuinely sitting with the picture he'd drawn. There was something behind her eyes that he couldn't quite name, something that had been there, he thought, for a long time before tonight. You're a better father than you think you are, she said. Or I'm a father who thinks about it too much and still gets it wrong. Both, she said. Those aren't mutually exclusive. He appreciated that she didn't argue him out of the self-doubt. She just placed it beside the evidence and let him hold both at once. Can I ask you something now? She said. Same answer, he said. You can ask. The chair. She said it plainly. You had to know how it would look. You had to know what people would assume. I knew, he said, and you did it anyway. I did it anyway. Why? He thought about it seriously rather than reaching for the flattering answer. Because I've been underestimated in a room before, he said. Not in the same way, not the same stakes, but I know what it feels like to be the version of yourself that the room has already decided on. And I know what it costs to sit there and absorb it because making a scene is worse. He met her eyes. I didn't want to be someone who watched that happen and chose the comfortable option. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said quietly, It wasn't a small thing. I want you to know that. It felt small to you, maybe. It didn't feel small, he said. It felt like the minimum. She nodded once, slowly. That's what made it significant. The waitress came and refilled their cups without being asked. They both thanked her. She moved on, and the cafe was briefly quiet around them. The distant sound of an espresso machine, the murmur of the couple at the far table who appeared to be in the middle of a difficult conversation about something that mattered. "What is it like?" Lucas asked. "The wealth. Not as an abstract thing. I don't mean what you do with it. I mean what it's like to live inside it." Victoria looked at him. "That is not a question I get asked. I'm curious about the real version, not the version people write about." She considered for a long moment. "It's insulating," she said, "in ways that are both good and very much not. There is never a practical problem that money can't solve, which removes an entire category of daily friction. You don't worry about the car breaking down, or the medical bill, or whether the rent clears. That part is, I won't pretend it's not relief." She paused. "But it also means that when something is wrong, you can't blame circumstance. You can't tell yourself that things would be different if you just had more resources. When the thing that's wrong is internal or relational, you are stripped of every excuse except the true ones." "Which are?" "That I stayed in the wrong situation too long because leaving required admitting it had been a mistake. That I let my work become the entire architecture of my identity because building something external is easier than building something internal. That I let years pass in which I told myself I preferred solitude when what I actually preferred was avoiding the risk of being disappointed again." She said it all evenly, with the steadiness of someone who has had the thoughts before and learned to hold them without flinching. Wealth doesn't cause those things, but it doesn't prevent them either, and somehow people always seem surprised by that. "People want to believe that enough money would fix whatever's broken in them," Lucas said. "And when they encounter someone with enough money who is still broken in the ways that matter, it's profoundly inconvenient for the narrative." She turned the cup. "So they find other explanations. She must be cold. She must be damaged. She must have done something to deserve the loneliness." A pause. "It's easier than accepting that nobody is exempt." "No," Lucas agreed. "Nobody is." They were quiet together for a moment. Not the silence of people who have run out of things to say. The silence of people who have said something real and are letting it settle. Outside, a woman walked past the window with a small dog on a long leash, the dog investigating the base of a parking meter with enormous dedication. Lucas watched it. Victoria watched it too. The small absurdity of it, the dog's total commitment to the project of the parking meter, the world continuing its ordinary business all around them, was somehow exactly right. "My foundation is launching a pediatric initiative in 3 underserved districts next spring," Victoria said after a while. "I've been fighting with the City Health Board for 14 months over the funding structure. It is the most tedious and necessary work I have ever done, and some mornings I wake up at 5 a.m. thinking about spreadsheets." "Is that the work you'd have chosen, if you'd started from zero?" "Yes," she said, without hesitation. "The specific work, yes. The circumstances I arrived at it through, no." She considered. "I think I would have made different choices in my 30s if I'd been less afraid. Different in ways that might have meant smaller scale, less reach, but more mine, somehow." She frowned slightly at her own imprecision. "That sounds ungrateful." "It sounds honest," he said. "Being grateful for what you have doesn't mean you can't have complicated feelings about how you got there." "Lily has clearly taught you something about complicated feelings." "Lily taught me that feelings don't resolve," he said. "You just learn to keep moving with them." Victoria looked at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read, something attentive and slightly careful, the look of someone who has caught a piece of language that landed closer to the center of something than they expected. "You're not what I assumed," she said finally. "What did you assume?" "I'm not sure I had time to assume much," she admitted. "You moved the chair before I had a chance to form a complete picture. But there was a moment before you did, when the pairings were announced, where I braced for whatever was coming. The discomfort, the awkward politeness, the conversation that would coast along the surface because neither party wanted to do the work." She paused. "I was prepared for that." "That's what you expected from tonight in general." "That's what I expect from most things," she said plainly. "It's not cynicism, it's pattern recognition." "And now?" She looked at him steadily. "Now I'm sitting in a cafe at 11:30 on a Saturday night having the first honest conversation I've had in, I don't know how long exactly, long enough that I'm slightly suspicious of it. Still waiting for the conversation to turn? Less than I was an hour ago, she said. He nodded. He understood that. The residue of old disappointments that didn't fully clear even when the present moment was giving you no reason for them. That was its own kind of damage, the kind that wasn't dramatic enough to name, but wore on you in the daily friction of never quite believing that the good thing in front of you was what it appeared to be. I don't have an agenda, he said. It came out simply, without defensiveness. I want to be clear about that, not because I'm trying to convince you, but because it's true. And I'd rather say it plainly than let the ambiguity sit there. I know, Victoria said. Do you believe it? She was quiet for a moment. I think I'm in the process of believing it, she said, which is the most honest answer I can give you. That's good enough, he said. And he meant it. He wasn't asking her to trust him. That would have been its own kind of manipulation, asking someone to override the protective instincts that existed for good reasons. I was asking her to be in the process, which was the only place any of this could actually begin. He'd learned that from grief, among other things. You couldn't leap from one shore to the other. You got wet. You moved through the water. That was the whole of it. They stayed another hour at Harlow's, and the conversation moved the way it moves when both parties have stopped being careful about impressing each other. Sideways and doubling back, picking up threads and dropping them and returning to them from different angles. She told him about the hospital in rural Mississippi and what it had actually looked like. The water stains on the ceiling tiles. The nurse who'd been working 14-hour shifts for 3 weeks because 2 of her colleagues had quit. The way the administrator had looked when Victoria told him the shortfall would be covered. Not relieved exactly, but like a man who had been holding his breath for so long he'd forgotten he was doing it. Lucas told her about the first time Lily's school had called because Lily had gotten into a fight. Not physically, but verbally, with a classmate who had made a remark about Lily not having a mother. Lily had responded with the particular devastation that 7-year-olds can deliver when they are genuinely furious and not yet old enough to moderate it. And the teacher had been more concerned than the situation warranted because she hadn't understood that Lily was not distressed. She was righteous. "What did you do?" Victoria asked. "I took her for ice cream," he said, which is probably not the pedagogically correct response. "What did you say?" "I asked her what she'd said to the other kid. She told me. And I said that some of it was probably too sharp and we'd need to talk about that. But I also said that being angry about something real was allowed, and that standing up for herself was allowed, and that we'd figure out the rest." Victoria nodded slowly. "You didn't make her apologize for being angry." "I made her apologize for one specific thing she'd said that crossed a line," he said. "But I didn't make her sorry for the feeling." He paused. "Claire would have done exactly the same thing, I think. So I just tried to imagine what she'd have done." Victoria looked at him across the table, with the coffee cup still warm between her hands and the late hour settling around them. And whatever she was thinking, she kept it to herself for the moment, held it somewhere behind the careful expression. But her eyes were different than they'd been at the Meridian. Something had shifted in them in the course of the last 2 hours. Something that was not yet defined or named, but was unmistakably real. "I should get back," Lucas said, finally. He looked at his phone. Past midnight. Renata would be fine, but he'd told her 11. "My sister's probably awake waiting to extract information about how this went." "What will you tell her?" He thought about it. "That it wasn't what I expected, that I'm glad she made me go." He paused. "What will you tell Claire?" "That the car was a good idea," Victoria said, "and that I may need to revise my current model of what an evening can be." He laughed. She smiled. They both stood, and the process of putting on coats and gathering themselves back into the world felt like something ordinary in the best possible sense. Like two people who had no reason to perform for each other doing a simple human thing. On the sidewalk outside Harlow's, the air was cold and sharp, and the city had thinned to its nighttime version. Fewer people, more space, the streets almost breathing. "Thank you for the chair," Victoria said. She said it simply, without ceremony. "Thank you for the coffee," he said. They exchanged numbers the way people do when neither of them is entirely sure what happens next, but both of them know that something does. Careful, practical, with the specific quiet of a moment that is trying not to put too much pressure on itself. Lucas's handwriting on the note card she'd taken from her coat pocket was slightly uneven, which somehow felt right. He waited until she'd gotten into the car her driver had brought around. He hadn't even noticed the car was waiting, and she'd clearly not thought to mention it. And then he walked back toward the hotel parking structure where he'd left his car 2.5 hours ago. The night was clear. His breath made small white shapes in the cold air. He put his hands in his coat pockets and walked. And somewhere around the second block, he realized that he was not replaying the evening with the anxious forensic detail that he usually applied to social interactions, picking apart what he'd said and whether it had landed wrong and whether he'd talked too much or not enough. He was just walking, with the conversation still warm somewhere in his chest, unanalyzed. That in itself was something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Back in the car, before he started the engine, he texted Renata, "On my way. Tell you tomorrow." She replied 40 seconds later. "Tomorrow? What does that mean?" Lucas. He put the phone down and drove home through the quiet city, and the particular weight of a Saturday night that had gone wrong in all the ways he'd expected, and right in a way he hadn't, was something he carried the whole drive home without trying to put it into words. Because some things are better left in the space before language for a little while, where they can exist without being managed. Lily was asleep when he got home, exactly as he'd known she would be, in the arrangement of animals exactly as he'd known it would be, and he stood in her doorway for a moment the way he always did, just to place himself in the reality of her, the actual solidity of this small person in this particular bed, in this apartment that they had made into something that functioned like a home. He did not think about the future. He did not make projections or plans, or allow himself any of the comfortable fantasies that the evening might have invited if he'd been less careful. He just stood in the doorway and breathed, and the apartment was quiet around him, but for the first time in a while, the quiet didn't have that particular weight to it. It was just quiet. And that, in its own small way, was enough. The photographs appeared online the following morning. Lucas found out because Renata texted him at 7:43 a.m. with a link and 3 question marks, which was her version of restraint. He was standing at the kitchen counter making Lily's lunch, peanut butter, no jelly, the crust cut off at a precise diagonal, because Lily had strong opinions about diagonal versus straight. And he put the knife down and looked at his phone and felt the specific sinking sensation of something that had been private becoming public without anyone's permission. The photos weren't bad exactly. Someone at the Meridian had taken them. Probably multiple someones, given how quickly they'd spread. The clearest one showed the moment he'd moved the chair. Him standing, chair in hand, the room blurred behind him, Victoria's expression caught in the half-second before she'd composed it back to neutral. It was a good photo in the technical sense. Sharp, well lit by the ballroom's overhead chandeliers, the contrast between his gray suit and her charcoal dress making the composition look almost deliberate. The captions were less good. Billionaire Victoria Ashford finds her match at luxury singles event, and he's 18 years younger. Who is Lucas Carter? The mystery man who made Victoria Ashford smile. Gold digger or genuine connection? The internet weighs in. Lily came into the kitchen in her pajamas, hair spectacularly tangled, dragging the cloth bear she'd named Gerald. She looked at Lucas, looked at his phone, looked at his face. "Did something bad happen?" she asked. "No," he said, which was mostly true. "Just reading." "You make that face when something bad happened." "What face?" She demonstrated. A compressed version of his expression, brow furrowed, mouth slightly open. He looked, he had to admit, exactly like that. "That's just my reading face," he said. "It's not," she said, with the serene certainty of a child who has studied her parent closely enough to know the difference. She climbed onto the kitchen stool and accepted the lunchbox he slid toward her. "Is it about the lady?" He looked at her. "What lady?" "Aunt Renata said you went to a party and met a lady." She opened the lunchbox, inspected the sandwich, and closed it again with apparent satisfaction. "She said you were hopeful, which is the word she uses when she thinks something's actually going to happen." Lucas made a mental note to have a conversation with his sister about information security. "It was just an event. I met someone nice. That's all." Lily considered this with the gravity she applied to most things. Is she nice like a friend or nice like something else? "Nice like someone I just met," Lucas said, which means I don't know yet. "Okay," Lily said, accepting this with the pragmatism she'd developed around incomplete information. "Can I have orange juice?" He poured the orange juice. He did not look at his phone again until Lily was at school, and he was back in the apartment, sitting at the kitchen table with a second cup of coffee, reading through the comment section of the article Renata had linked, which was a mistake, because comment sections are always a mistake. But he read it anyway with the grim thoroughness of someone checking the extent of an injury. The division was roughly what he'd expected. A portion of people found the photograph charming, or at minimum interesting. A larger and louder portion had already constructed a complete narrative about his motivations, his character, his finances, and his future, based entirely on a single image of him carrying a chair across a ballroom. He closed the browser. He picked up his phone, and after a moment's consideration, he typed a text to Victoria. "I assume you've seen the photos. Are you all right?" The reply came 40 minutes later. "I've seen them. I've also seen worse." "Are you?" He thought about it. "I've seen worse too," he typed back. The comment section was probably a mistake. "The comment section is always a mistake," she wrote. "I stopped reading mine approximately 9 years ago. Sensible," he said. "Survival," she replied. He sat with that for a moment, then typed, "I'm sorry if this causes you problems." There was a longer pause this time. Then, "You moved a chair. You didn't cause anything. The people who decided what it meant caused it." A beat. Then, "Don't apologize for doing a decent thing." He stared at the screen for a moment. Then he put the phone down and went to work, because the alternative was sitting in the kitchen reading things that would make him feel worse, and he'd had enough of that particular exercise already. The weeks that followed had their own rhythm. They texted in the way two people text when they are both being careful without acknowledging that they are being careful. Not every day at first, then most days, the frequency increasing without either of them remarking on it. He sent her a photograph of Lily's latest school project, a poster about the water cycle that Lily had decorated with what she described as dramatic clouds. Victoria replied with a photograph of the view from her office at 6:30 a.m., the city still gray and quiet outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. He found it beautiful. He told her so. She said, "It's better with coffee, but then everything is." They met for dinner 3 weeks after the mixer at a restaurant that was neither cheap nor aggressively expensive. The middle ground that said, "This is a real evening, but I am not trying to impress you with money or the absence of it." Victoria had suggested it. He'd noticed she was consistent about that, making choices that deliberately underpowered the wealth, not hiding it, but not leading with it either. He respected the effort. Dinner was 3 hours, and at no point did either of them check their phones. He could not remember the last time that had happened. The photographs had generated a second wave of attention when someone recognized them entering the restaurant. Victoria's publicist, a brisk woman named Sandra, who communicated exclusively in declarative sentences, had called the following morning to discuss strategy. Victoria had listened to Sandra's strategy and then declined it entirely, and told her she'd be in touch. "She thinks I should release a statement," Victoria told Lucas the following week over the phone. "What kind of statement?" "Something about private matters and mutual respect. The standard language that says nothing while creating the impression of transparency." She paused. "I find it exhausting." "What do you want to say?" "Nothing," she said. "I want to say nothing. I want my life to be mine." "Then say nothing," he said. "You're allowed." Sandra disagrees. Sandra's job is to manage perception. Perception is different from reality. She'd argue they're functionally identical. "Then she's wrong," Lucas said mildly, "and I say that as someone who has been the subject of the perception this week and can confirm the reality is significantly less interesting." Victoria laughed. The sound of it caught him off guard, the way it did every time. Not because it was unexpected, but because it was completely unguarded. A real laugh that she clearly hadn't planned, and those were the ones that had the most weight. "I'll tell her you said she's wrong," Victoria said. "She already knows I think so," he said. "I'm the man in the gray suit. My opinion isn't in her brief." He heard her still smiling when she said goodbye. It was a Tuesday evening in early December when everything sharpened. Victoria had called him that afternoon, not texted, called, which she did less often and which therefore carried a slightly different quality of intention. She'd asked if he would like to come see the gallery, her private gallery, on the east side of the city, the one she'd mentioned briefly on the night they met. She had a new acquisition she wanted to show someone who would look at it honestly. "Not someone who'll tell me what they think I want to hear," he said. "I have people for that," she said. "I need someone who'll tell me what they actually see." Renata agreed to an evening with Lily without requiring an explanation, which Lucas appreciated, partly because he didn't have a good one ready, and partly because Renata's expression when she arrived had a quality of badly suppressed satisfaction that he chose not to address. The gallery occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse building on Ashworth Lane, a building Victoria owned, though she'd converted the upper floors into studio space that she rented to working artists at well below market rate, which she had not mentioned and which he found out only because the building manager, an older man named Pete, said it without thinking while signing Lucas in. Victoria had given him a look when he'd raised an eyebrow at this information. "It wasn't a charitable impulse," she said. "I wanted good company in the building." "Right," Lucas said. "Don't make it something larger than it is." "I'm not," he said. "I'm just noting that it's there." She led him through the main gallery space. High ceilings, white walls, lighting that was warm without being dramatic. The kind of careful design that made you feel the art was the point rather than the space. There were perhaps 30 pieces in this room alone, ranging from intimate-scale oil paintings to large canvases that consumed entire sections of wall. He moved slowly, because moving slowly in a room like this was the appropriate response, and because he genuinely wanted to look. The piece she'd acquired was at the far end of the gallery, and when he saw it, he stopped. It was a painting of a woman walking away from the viewer through an open doorway, the light on the other side of the door giving no information about what was there. Not darkness, not brilliance, just the suggestion of space. The woman's posture was not defeated. It was not triumphant. It was the posture of someone in the middle of motion, uncertain and committed simultaneously, which was the most interesting thing about it. "How long did you stand in front of it before you bought it?" he asked. "An hour," she said. "What made you decide?" She was quiet for a moment. "She doesn't know what's on the other side," Victoria said. "And she's going anyway." A pause. "I've spent a great deal of my life waiting until I had more information before I walked through anything. This woman doesn't have more information. She just has the doorway." Lucas looked at the painting and then at Victoria, and there was something in that moment that had a different weight than the moments before it. Something that had been building through the weeks of texts and dinners and careful conversations. A thing that neither of them had named because naming it would have put pressure on it that it might not yet have been able to hold. He didn't name it now either, but he felt it. "It's a very good painting," he said. "Yes," she said. "I thought so." They were standing there side by side in the quiet of the gallery when the main door opened behind them. He heard the footsteps first, purposeful, quick, and then Victoria's slight shift beside him. A change in the quality of her stillness that told him she knew who it was before she turned. The woman who walked into the gallery was in her early 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, dressed well in the specific way of a person who has been well-dressed so long it no longer requires thought. She was attractive in a way that had clearly sharpened rather than softened with age, and she moved through the space with the ease of someone who had been here many times before. Her eyes went directly to Victoria and then directly to Lucas, and what happened in those eyes in the half-second between was visible and unambiguous. "Diana," Victoria said. Her voice was composed, but he heard something tighten in it. "I've been trying to reach you since Tuesday," Diana Brooks said. She addressed Victoria completely, as though Lucas's presence in the room was a detail that could be managed later. "You haven't returned my calls." "I've been busy," Victoria said. "I saw the photographs." Diana finally looked at Lucas. A full, frank assessment that lasted several seconds and made no attempt to be subtle. Then she looked back at Victoria. "I wanted to talk to you before this went further." "Before what went further?" Victoria said. It came out flat, not quite a question. Diana's jaw was set in the way of someone who has decided on a course of action before they arrived and intends to complete it. "Victoria, you know what I mean. You've been photographed twice. The media has your name in articles alongside his name. Do you know anything about him? Do you know who he is beyond what he's chosen to present to you?" "Diana, I have people I can call," Diana said. Her voice had a firmness to it that was not unkindness. It was, Lucas recognized, the voice of someone who genuinely believed they were preventing harm. "I can have a complete picture within 48 hours. His finances, his background, everything. You don't have to—" "Excuse me," Lucas said. Both women looked at him. Diana with wariness, Victoria with something more complicated. I don't mean to interrupt, Lucas said. He was keeping his voice even, not because he wasn't rattled, but because getting loud was not the answer, and he knew it. But I think I should probably be part of this conversation, since it's about me. Diana looked at him the way people look when they've been caught behaving as though someone isn't in the room while that person is very much in the room. I don't think that's... My name is Lucas Carter, he said. I'm 32. I'm a structural engineer working reduced contract hours because I'm raising my daughter. Her name is Lily. She's 7. My wife died 3 years ago from a brain aneurysm. Fast, no warning. I have no criminal record, no outstanding debts beyond a manageable mortgage, and no interest in Victoria's money, though I understand you have no reason to believe that last part based on a photograph. Diana stared at him. I moved my chair across the room because someone made a cruel remark and Victoria heard it, he continued. Not because I had a plan, not because I calculated anything. I did it because it was the right thing to do, and I didn't want to be someone who sat there and did nothing. He paused. That is the complete list of my agendas. The gallery was very quiet. Diana's expression had shifted during this, not fully, not into anything as simple as acceptance, but the hard certainty of it had cracked in a way that was visible. She turned to Victoria. You could have told me you were going to be here tonight, she said, and the stiffness in her voice now had something else underneath it. I didn't know we'd be discussing my relationship in front of the person involved, Victoria said. There was a sharpness in it that she didn't sand down. I'm trying to protect you. I know you are. Victoria crossed her arms, not defensively, but in the way people do when they are trying to hold themselves together precisely enough to say the next thing correctly. Diana, I know. And I love you for it, I do. But I need you to hear what you just did. Diana looked at her steadily. What did I do? You walked in here and spoke about a man standing 8 feet from you as though he wasn't present. You told me you'd have him investigated. You made a judgment about his motives and his character, and you delivered that judgment in front of him. Victoria's voice was controlled, but there was nothing cold about it. It was the voice of someone who has been carrying something for a long time and has decided that now is the time to set it down and make it visible. You did to him exactly what was done to me in that ballroom. You decided who he was before you listened. Diana opened her mouth. Then she closed it. And you've been doing a version of that to me for years, Victoria said, more quietly. Everyone has. Deciding what I should want, deciding who can be trusted with me, deciding that my judgment requires oversight because I'm wealthy and visible, and... She stopped herself, drew a breath. I've spent 20 years in rooms full of people who have an opinion about my life that they believe supersedes my own. I don't expect that from strangers, but I did not expect it here. Diana was very still. The gallery held them all in its careful light. The paintings on the walls that did not care about any of this, the quiet of the space, the particular atmosphere of a room in which something real had just been said and the air was still adjusting to it. I wasn't trying to do that, Diana said finally. I know, Victoria said. That's the part that matters. Diana turned to Lucas. And this time the look was different. Not assessment, not the cataloging of a threat, but something more uncomfortable and more honest. The look of a person recognizing that they've been wrong in a way they can't immediately manage around. I owe you an apology, she said. The words came out stiffly because they were real, and real apologies are never smooth. I made assumptions. I acted on them in front of you. That was... She stopped, started again. I know it doesn't fix what I said, but I am sorry. Lucas looked at her for a moment. I understand why you did it, he said. If someone I loved was in a situation where I thought they might be getting hurt, I'd want to step in too. The instinct is right, just... He glanced at Victoria, then back. The way it gets delivered matters. Diana nodded. A small, single nod that cost something. The three of them stood in the gallery for a moment in the particular silence that follows an argument that has resolved in a way no one fully planned for. Not clean, not comfortable, but real, with the specific quality of air after a storm is passed when everything is still slightly wet and nothing is where it was before. It was Diana who spoke first. How did you two actually end up here, she asked. The combativeness was gone from her voice, replaced by something that was simply curiosity, still careful, but no longer armored. She has a painting she wanted someone to look at honestly, Lucas said. Diana glanced toward the far wall. The woman in the doorway. Yes. Diana was quiet for a moment. She looked at the painting, then at Victoria, then at Lucas. Something moved across her face that she didn't name aloud, but it was there. She found it in September, Diana said, more to herself than either of them. She's been trying to decide what it meant for months. She looked at Victoria. You told me it was just a piece you liked. It is a piece I like, Victoria said. It's also more than that. Victoria held her friend's gaze. Yes, she said. It's also more than that. Another quiet stretched between them. The different kind this time. The kind between two people who have known each other long enough that certain things don't require full articulation. Lucas watched it and felt what you feel when you witness an understanding passing between people who have a long shared history. A mixture of being an outsider to something and recognizing that being outside it was entirely appropriate. Diana eventually sat down on the low bench at the center of the gallery, the one place there for people who wanted to spend time with a piece, and her posture, when she sat, was different than the posture she'd walked in with. More tired, more real. Sit, she said to them, the way people say it when they've stopped performing. Victoria sat beside her. Lucas found the edge of the bench on Victoria's other side, and the three of them sat in the quiet of the gallery with the woman in the doorway on the far wall, and Diana asked Lucas questions, real ones this time, delivered without an agenda. He answered them the same way. He told her about Lily without being precious about it, and about the engineering work, and about the event on Saturday, and what had actually happened, from his own unpolished perspective. Diana listened. She was a good listener when she chose to be. He could see that, the same quality he'd noticed in Victoria, though expressed differently. Where Victoria listened with a particular still attention, Diana listened with her whole face, the reactions moving across it in real time, unmanaged. She laughed at something, Diana said, when he got to the part about the cafe. At Harlow's. Something you said. About the chicken, Lucas said. Diana looked at Victoria. Tell me that's not true. It's absolutely true, Victoria said. He manages to produce cement from a chicken breast. Multiple techniques, Lucas confirmed. I've tried several. It can't be that difficult, Diana said. You'd think, Lucas said. And yet. Diana looked at him for a moment. Then she shook her head, and the last of the formal quality left her expression, and she was just a woman sitting in a gallery at 9 in the evening who had arrived certain of something and was leaving uncertain of it, which was its own kind of courage. Victoria doesn't laugh easily, Diana said. Not the real laugh? I know, Lucas said. I can tell the difference. Diana absorbed that. Yes, she said after a moment. I imagine you can. Victoria looked straight ahead at the painting. Her profile, in the gallery's warm light, had a quality Lucas had come to recognize over the past weeks. The look she had when she was feeling something she hadn't entirely decided how to handle yet, when the feeling was real enough that it required some active management, not to suppress it, but to make sure it was held correctly. You're going to make this very complicated, Diana told her. I know, Victoria said. The media won't leave it alone, you know that. I know. And the board. Someone will decide it's relevant. Someone always does. I know, Diana. Diana sighed, not with frustration, but with the specific kind of surrender that comes from loving someone and recognizing that loving them means accepting the things you can't control. He'd better be everything he says he is, she said. He is, Victoria said. She didn't look at Lucas when she said it. She kept looking at the painting, at the woman in the doorway, at the light on the other side that gave nothing away. He's also several things he hasn't said yet, probably, as are we all. A pause. But he's what he says he is. Lucas looked at the side of her face, at the careful set of her jaw, and the way the gallery light found the gray at her temples that she didn't try to cover, and the particular way she held her own opinions, firmly, without defensiveness, like someone who had fought hard to trust them and wasn't about to apologize for the result. He thought about the painting. He thought about walking through a doorway without knowing what was on the other side. He thought about a woman who had said, in a cafe at midnight, that she was in the process of believing something, that the process was the most honest answer she could give. Diana left an hour later, after the conversation had drifted to other things. The Foundation's spring initiative, Lily's font opinions, which Diana had found inexplicably charming. And when she hugged Victoria at the door, she held on for a moment longer than a casual goodbye, the kind of hold that carried everything unsaid in it. She nodded at Lucas. He nodded back. After she was gone, the gallery settled into its quiet again. Victoria stood with her hands in her coat pockets, looking at the painting. "She means well," Lucas said. "She always has," Victoria said. "That's what makes it complicated. If she were careless or self-interested, it would be easier. But she's been standing beside me for 30 years, and the pattern of that is, it's hard to see when it stops serving you." "She saw it tonight," Lucas said. "She did." Victoria was quiet for a moment. That cost her something, admitting it. She's not a woman who adjusts her view easily. Neither am I, for that matter. "You adjusted it tonight," he said. "I said what I needed to say. That's different from adjusting." "You said it in front of someone who needed to hear it," Lucas said. "That's closer to courage than adjustment." Victoria turned to look at him. In the gallery light, with the evening's full weight sitting between them and the painting on the wall, and Diana's question still hanging in the air of the room, her expression had shed the last of its management. She was just looking at him, not performing calm, not constructing an answer, just looking. "I don't know what this is," she said quietly. "I want to be honest about that. I don't know what it is or what it's going to be, or whether any of the things that are complicated about it are navigable." "I don't know either," Lucas said. "That doesn't bother you?" He thought about it genuinely, the way she'd taught him to by example, taking the time to find the actual answer rather than the available one. "It bothers me less than the alternative would," he said, "which is knowing what something is before you've let it become anything. I've done that. I've closed things down before they were given a fair chance because the outcome wasn't guaranteed." He paused. "That's its own kind of damage." She held his gaze for a long moment. "The chair," she said again. Not the way she'd said it at Harlow's, like that had been a question, almost. This was something else. This was the word holding the weight of everything that had come after it. The weeks, and the dinners, and the texts, and the photographs, and the conversation they'd just had. All of it packed into a single syllable, like a coordinate for a place they'd both been traveling toward since that first Saturday night. "The chair," he confirmed. They stood in the gallery in the quiet of the evening, with the woman in the doorway watching from the far wall, caught forever in the middle of a step she'd already committed to. Outside, the city did what cities do at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday in December, moved on, indifferent, with its own noise and its own business, and its complete lack of interest in what was happening inside a converted warehouse on Ashworth Lane. The cold had deepened. The windows were slightly fogged at the edges from the warmth inside. Neither of them moved toward the door. Neither of them was quite ready for the outside yet, with its noise and its opinions and its photographs and its comment sections and its complete certainty about two people it had never actually met. In here, for now, it was only the paintings and the warm light and the two of them standing in the approximate center of something they couldn't yet name but had both decided, without saying so, to stop walking away from. The city had its own way of processing things it didn't understand. By the end of December, the photographs had cycled through their second and third waves, the initial curiosity, then the opinion pieces, then the think pieces responding to the opinion pieces, and finally the particular exhaustion that follows when the internet has wrung something dry and moved on to the next available subject. Lucas had watched the whole arc from a careful distance, reading less than he probably should have and more than was strictly healthy, finding the balance point somewhere around the second week and trying to hold it there. Victoria, true to her word, said nothing publicly. Sandra had escalated twice. Once, with a drafted statement, she'd had a communications consultant wordsmith into something that managed to be both inoffensive and completely empty. And once with a phone call in which she'd laid out, in detailed and organized language, exactly which relationships and board perceptions were at risk if the association with Lucas Carter continued without some form of official framing. Victoria had listened to the full presentation with the patience of someone who respects competence even when they disagree with its conclusions, and then told Sandra that the Foundation's work would be the public record she stood on, not her personal life, and that the conversation was over. Sandra had not been pleased, but she had not been surprised either, which said something about the length of their working relationship. Lucas found out about the board comments through a different channel. a brief, careful message from a foundation board member named Richard Okafor, a man in his late 60s who had known Victoria for 15 years and who apparently felt the situation warranted a personal reach-out. The message had found Lucas through the engineering firm's general contact, which told him that Richard had made some effort to locate it, which in turn told him that Richard took his role on the board with a specificity that went well beyond quarterly meetings. The message was not hostile. It was the written equivalent of the conversation Diana had tried to have in the gallery, concerned, direct, framed around Victoria's reputation and the foundation's public standing rather than any explicit accusation. Lucas read it twice, and then he called Victoria and read it to her over the phone. There was a pause on her end. "He found your contact at the firm," she said. "He did." "Richard is thorough," she said. "He's also, underneath the institutional concern, a genuinely decent person who has spent 15 years watching the foundation deal with exactly this kind of distraction and worrying about it." Another pause. "He's not wrong that it's a distraction. Does it change anything for you?" He asked it honestly, without loading it with expectation in either direction. The weeks had given him a clearer picture of who she was. And one of the things he'd understood was that she carried her responsibilities to the foundation with a weight that was entirely real, not performative, not the kind of thing you said in interviews. The pediatric initiative alone had $300,000 in pending commitments that depended on donor relationships that depended, at least in part, on the foundation's perceived stability and her perceived judgment. I was not so consumed by his own feelings about the situation that he couldn't see that clearly. "No," she said. She said it after thinking, which was the only way she said anything that mattered. "It changes the complications, not the direction." "What's the direction?" "Forward," she said. "The direction is forward." He didn't press it beyond that. It was enough. He wrote back to Richard Okafor, not a long message, but a careful one, the kind that took 3 drafts before it said what he meant, without saying more than it should. He introduced himself plainly, acknowledged Richard's concern as legitimate, and said that he had no interest in being a problem for the foundation, and that if Richard wanted a direct conversation, he was available for one. He sent it and told Victoria he'd done it. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. It was becoming a thing between them, that particular exchange. "But Richard went to the trouble of finding me. That deserves a real response." Richard replied within the hour, and they met for coffee 2 days later at a diner on Caldwell that Lucas knew from the Saturday market. His territory, chosen deliberately, on the theory that conversations went better when at least one party was comfortable. Richard had arrived in a coat that cost more than Lucas's monthly car payment and sat in the vinyl booth without any apparent discomfort, which Lucas noted and respected. They talked for an hour and a half. Richard asked direct questions. Lucas answered them directly. There was a moment around the 45-minute mark when Richard had asked about Lily, not prying, but with the particular interest of someone who understood that the child was the most important variable in the equation. And Lucas had talked about her with the unguarded ease he always brought to conversations about his daughter, and he'd watched Richard's posture shift slightly, some decision being made that didn't announce itself. At the end, Richard shook his hand across the table. "Victoria has never made a decision in her professional life that I considered reckless," Richard said. "I don't intend to assume her personal life is different territory." He held the handshake for a moment. "But I will tell you that she has worked harder than any person I know to build something that actually helps people who need it. If this goes badly for her, not in public opinion terms, but in the real terms, I will be concerned." "So will I," Lucas said. Richard looked at him steadily. "Yes," he said after a moment. "I believe that." He left without resolving anything officially, which was its own kind of resolution. Lucas drove home through the early January traffic with the heat on high and the radio off. And he thought about the particular choreography of being a person who other people needed to vet before they'd accept him as real. The Richard Okafors and Diana Brookses, and Sandra the publicists and the comment sections and the article writers who had already drafted the narrative before they'd learned his name. And he found that the exhaustion of it was different than he'd expected. Less angry than tired. Less defensive than simply weary of having to prove, again and again, that the minimum decency of moving a chair across a room was not evidence of a scheme. I was halfway home when his phone buzzed on the passenger seat. "Victoria," a text. How did it go? He stopped at the red light and typed, "He's a good man, worried about the right things. We're fine." Then, after a moment, "How are you?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Then, "I've been thinking about the painting." He smiled despite himself. "The woman in the doorway?" "She went through," Victoria wrote. "In case you were wondering what I decided." He sat at the green light for long enough that the car behind him tapped its horn. January turned to February with the particular grudging reluctance of a city winter that wasn't ready to let go. And the external noise faded in the way noise always eventually does when nothing new feeds it. The comment sections went quiet. The articles stopped being written. Sandra sent a single-line email noting that the media cycle had moved on and that she hoped Victoria would consider some proactive positioning going forward. And Victoria forwarded it to Lucas with no comment other than a single emoji. A small thumbs down, which he found inordinately satisfying. What grew in the space left behind was quieter and considerably more substantial. Victoria came to the apartment for the first time on a Sunday in early February. Lucas had told Lily that a friend was coming for dinner, framed precisely that way, because Lily deserved accurate information delivered without drama. Lily had asked 2 questions. Was it a lady? And would she have opinions about fonts? The first answer was yes. The second answer was unknown but promising. He'd actually cooked, which was to say he'd spent Friday evening on a single recipe, the same one, not several simultaneously, and had produced something he could describe with confidence as edible. Roast chicken with root vegetables. A safe choice, selected partly for its structural simplicity, and partly because Lily liked it, and partly because he could not face the symbolism of serving cement to Victoria Ashford on the first evening she came to his home. She arrived at 6:30 carrying 2 things: a bottle of wine she'd clearly chosen without trying to impress anyone, a mid-range red, nothing remarkable on the label, and a book wrapped in plain paper that she handed to Lily at the door without ceremony. Lily, who had been hovering near the entrance with the particular energy of a child exercising extreme self-restraint, took the book and tore the paper off with zero restraint. It was a large-format illustrated atlas, the kind with beautiful maps and small painted vignettes of landscapes and animals from different parts of the world, printed on heavy paper that felt significant in small hands. Lily looked at it for a full 5 seconds. "This is the best font I've ever seen," she said. Victoria looked at Lucas over Lily's head with an expression that said, "You told her about the fonts." Lucas's expression said, "Of course I did." And something in the exchange, something in the ease of it, the shorthand that had developed between them without either of them engineering it, settled into the apartment like something that had decided to stay. Dinner was not smooth. Lucas burned the garlic bread, which he'd added at the last minute and then forgotten about while setting the table, and the smoke alarm went off briefly, and Lily found this genuinely hilarious and laughed until she had to put her fork down. Victoria sat at the kitchen table and did not perform composure. She just absorbed the chaos of it, the way someone absorbs chaos when they're not afraid of it, which is to say, she sat with it and found it entirely fine. Lily asked her, over the roast chicken, whether she had ever seen snow in a country that had a lot of it. "I was in Norway for a week several years ago," Victoria said, "in January. More snow than you can imagine." "Were there polar bears?" "Polar bears are further north. There were reindeer." Lily absorbed this with great seriousness. "Did they have names?" "The reindeer?" "Yes," Victoria considered. "I didn't think to ask." "You should have asked," Lily said, not unkindly, but with the directness of someone who takes the naming of animals seriously. "Names matter." "You're right," Victoria said. "I should have." Lily looked at her for a moment, apparently satisfied with this response. Then she returned to her chicken, and the conversation moved on, and Lucas watched Victoria across the table and understood that she was genuinely present in a way that wasn't about being impressive or appropriate. She was just there, in the imperfect noise of his kitchen on a Sunday evening, and she was not performing her comfort, she simply felt it. That, he thought, was harder to fake than anything. After dinner, while Lucas cleared up, Lily took Victoria and the atlas to the living room and showed her the map she'd been making at school, a hand-drawn project of their neighborhood, colored in pencil with varying levels of accuracy and a level of cartographic confidence that exceeded the available evidence. Victoria sat on the floor, which surprised Lucas when he came through from the kitchen, and they bent over the atlas together, Lily pointing out where things were on her map, and Victoria pointing out where similar things appeared in the atlas. He stood in the doorway, the same posture he took in Lily's bedroom doorway at night, just placing himself in the reality of something, and watched his daughter explain the significance of the farmer's market on Caldwell Street to a woman worth $3 billion who was sitting cross-legged on his living room rug, and something happened in his chest that was not a small thing and that he didn't try to minimize or rush. Later, after Lily had gone to bed, less resistant than usual, a fact that Lily clearly thought she was concealing, but that Lucas clocked immediately. Victoria and Lucas sat at the kitchen table with the wine and the particular quiet of a household that has gone to sleep around you. "She's remarkable," Victoria said. She wasn't being polite. Lucas knew the difference. "She has her moments," he said. "She also has a complete meltdown about shoes approximately twice a week." "Shoes specifically?" "She has opinions about the sequence of putting them on. Don't ask." "I have opinions about shoes," Victoria said. "Maybe I understand." "Your opinions probably involve purchasing power." "They involve whether the heel is going to kill me by noon," she said. "Different kind of structural concern. You'd understand it." He laughed. They were quiet for a moment, the comfortable kind. "She didn't ask me anything about what I do," Victoria said, "or the money, or anything external." "She asked about reindeer names," Lucas said. "She asked about what actually matters," Victoria said, and she said it with a softness that was different from her usual register, something that came from further back, from the part of a person that doesn't get to speak very often in the course of a normal day. "Did tonight feel different than you expected?" he asked. She thought about it. "Yes and no. I expected to feel out of place, like an element in the wrong compound. I thought there would be a moment where the gap between my life and this," she gestured around the kitchen, its ordinary cluttered warmth, "would announce itself." "And?" "The smoke alarm went off," she said, "and I felt completely at home." He looked at her across the table. She was still in the clothes she'd arrived in. No adjustments made, no armor reinstated, just the woman who'd been here all evening. There was something in her face that was open in a way he recognized because he'd been watching it open slowly for 3 months, the way a window opens when someone finally decides the room needs air. "Victoria," he said. "I know," she said. "I haven't said anything yet." "I know what you were going to say," she said. Not with arrogance, with the directness of someone who has stopped pretending they don't see what they see. "And I know, Lucas. I feel it too. I have for a while." She paused. "Which is its own terrifying thing." "What's terrifying about it?" "Because I know what it costs when it goes wrong," she said. "I've paid that cost, and I know that knowing the cost doesn't protect you from it. The knowing and the doing are entirely separate problems." She looked at the wine glass, turned it slightly. "And because what you have here, what you've built, this is real in a way that my life hasn't been in a very long time, and I don't want to be someone who steps into it and damages it." "You wouldn't," he said. "You don't know that." "No," he admitted. "But I know you've spent 3 months being extraordinarily careful not to," he said. "And I know that Lily just spent an hour on the floor with you looking at maps without being asked, which means she made her own decision, and that kid's judgment is better than most adults I've met." Victoria looked at him. "You're using your 7-year-old as a character reference." "She's an excellent judge of people," he said. "She decided Gerald was a bad name for the bear about 6 months after she named him. She was right. The bear is clearly a Walter." Victoria laughed. The full, unguarded version, the one that arrived without planning. It filled the kitchen briefly and then settled, and the quiet after it was the good kind. "I'm not asking you for anything specific," Lucas said, when the quiet had settled enough. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not asking you to make a decision or define anything or sign on to something with terms. I wanted to say, without the management, that this is something I don't want to walk away from, and that whatever complications there are, I'd rather deal with them from inside it than spend the time wondering about them from outside." She looked at him for a long moment, not processing. She'd already processed. This was the look of someone who had arrived at a decision and was confirming it. "I'm not good at this," she said. "I want you to know that. I manage things. I've managed most of my life. The impulse to create structure around uncertainty is very ingrained, and it is not always useful in personal situations. I know, he said. I've watched you resist it for 3 months. Has it been obvious? Only because I'm doing the same thing, he said. The engineering background. We both want the structural analysis before we commit to the load-bearing wall. She smiled. And? And sometimes you have to live in the house before you know which walls matter, he said. That's the part they don't teach you. She reached across the table, not dramatically, just the small movement of someone extending a hand across a kitchen table, and placed her hand over his. It was a simple gesture, practical in its way, unheroic. Her hand was not perfectly smooth. There were the lines of someone who worked and traveled and didn't spend time worrying about the surface of their hands. He felt the warmth of it and didn't say anything, because some things are better received in silence. They sat like that for a while, in the kitchen that smelled of roasted chicken and slightly burned garlic bread, with the February night outside the window and Lily's atlas on the living room floor, and the ordinary complete reality of a life that had been rebuilt from something broken and had turned out, against various odds, to be a life worth sharing. There'll be more, he said eventually. More opinions, more photographs, more people deciding what this is. I know, she said. Richard will probably want another coffee. Richard will want quarterly updates, she said. He's thorough. Diana will watch you closely. Diana watches me closely regardless, Victoria said. At least now she'll have accurate information to work with. She paused. She texted me, by the way, after the gallery. What did she say? She said, he answered every question I was going to ask before I asked them. That's either very good or very suspicious. A beat. I told her it was very good. She said, I know, that's what worries me. Victoria looked at him with a dry expression. She's improving. She loves you, Lucas said, in the specifically complicated way that involves intense scrutiny and terrible timing, Victoria said. Yes, she does. Outside, the February wind moved against the windows with a sound that winter makes when it's losing the argument. The heating clicked on in the way old apartment. Heating clicks on, not gracefully, with a thunk and a hiss that was the building's equivalent of clearing its throat. Lucas had learned to find it reassuring, that sound. It meant the system was working. It meant the apartment was holding against the cold outside. It was the infrastructure of ordinary life doing what infrastructure does. He thought about that briefly, about structural things, about how the things that hold the most weight are almost never the things you can see from the outside. The decorative elements get the attention. The load-bearing elements just hold. What happens after tonight? Victoria asked. She was asking the real question, the one underneath the smaller ones. We figure it out as we go, Lucas said. That's the actual answer. There isn't a plan that makes it clean. There's just tomorrow and the day after and the decisions we make in each one. That's not a very satisfying structure, she said. No, he agreed, but it's the only honest one. She looked at him, then she looked around the kitchen, at the slightly scorched garlic bread that was still in the pan because he'd forgotten to throw it out, at Lily's drawing of a dragon on the refrigerator that had been there since October, at the coffee maker that was slightly too large for the counter and stuck out past the edge, at the accumulated ordinary detail of a life that two people had been living and managing and showing up for day after day. I like it here, she said. She said it simply, like a fact she'd verified. Good, he said. You're welcome here. She nodded, once. She kept her hand where it was. The city went on outside with its February cold and its indifferent noise and its photographs and its opinions and its complete inability to know what was actually happening in an ordinary apartment kitchen on a Sunday night. None of that came through the window. None of it was in the room. In the room there was only the sound of the heating system and the wind against the glass, and two people who had chosen, by increments and over months, to stop walking away from something real. In the morning, Victoria would leave before Lily woke, not because she was hiding, but because they were both careful people, and careful people honor the pace of things. There would be more conversations and more complications, and at least one more argument about something that mattered, because neither of them was the kind of person who didn't have those. There would be a moment, sometime in the next few months, when Lily would ask a direct question that required a direct answer, and Lucas would give her one, and Lily would process it with the pragmatic grace she applied to most things, and then ask whether Victoria had figured out the reindeers' names. There would be days when the weight of being a public person and a private person simultaneously would press on Victoria in ways she didn't fully share because she was still learning to share them. There would be evenings when Lucas's exhaustion from the job and the parenting and the sheer sustained effort of loving anything after loss would make him quieter than she needed, and he would have to learn to say so rather than manage it in the old way, the alone way. None of that had happened yet. Right now, there was only the kitchen and the wine and the hand and the winter outside and the small particular truth that two people who had spent a long time being careful about the wrong things had in the end chosen the right kind of carelessness. The kind that walks through a doorway without knowing what's on the other side. The kind that moves a chair across a room before it's calculated whether it's a good idea. The kind that is less about courage and more about refusing, finally, to let fear be the one that makes the decision. Victoria did not leave right away. Neither of them was ready for the evening to be over, and the wine was still in the glasses, and the window was making that sound against the February wind, and the apartment was warm. They stayed at the kitchen table, and the conversation moved in the unhurried way it moved now, between people who have stopped performing for each other, through things that mattered and things that didn't particularly matter but were pleasant to talk about anyway. And the clock moved toward midnight, and neither of them watched it. Outside, the last of the winter news cycle was carrying something else entirely. Someone else's story, someone else's photograph, the constant engine of public attention that had turned briefly toward them and then, finding nothing to sustain the machinery, had simply moved on. The comment sections had gone quiet. The think pieces had been archived. The algorithm had identified fresher material and followed it, the way it always did. They were private again, which was, in the end, exactly what they had both wanted. Private and deliberate and honest in the particular way of people who have been lonely long enough to know the difference between company and connection, and who had found, against reasonable odds, that the difference was sitting right here in this kitchen, in the remains of a Sunday dinner, in the warmth of a hand and the sound of a heating system doing its ordinary faithful work. That was the whole of it, and the whole of it was enough. Spring arrived the way it always does in the city. Not all at once, but in pieces, the way a person comes back to themselves after a long, difficult winter. A week of warmth followed by 3 days of cold. Trees that budded and then stopped, reconsidering. The farmer's market on Caldwell Street, returning to its full Saturday presence. The honey booth, back in its usual spot. Lily stopping there with the focused intention she applied to all transactions involving small, bear-shaped jars. Victoria came with them the first time in late March, on a Saturday when the temperature had finally committed to something above 50, and the sky was the particular clean blue that only happens after a week of rain. She had worn sensible shoes, which Lily noticed and approved of without saying so directly. Lucas could tell by the way Lily didn't look at the shoes, which meant she had looked at the shoes, assessed them, and found them satisfactory. They moved through the market at Lily's pace, which was not a fast pace. There was the honey booth, the bread vendor who always had samples, the woman who sold hand-thrown pottery and let Lily touch the pieces as long as she was careful, and the man at the far end who grew herbs and greeted Lily by name because she had been coming to this market since she was 4, and he had watched her grow with the quiet pride of someone who considers himself an auxiliary part of the village it takes to raise a child. "She knows everyone," Victoria said, walking beside Lucas while Lily negotiated the price of a small bunch of rosemary with the seriousness of someone closing a significant contract. "She's been coming here since before she was old enough to walk the whole distance without being carried," he said. "This is her territory." Victoria watched Lily accept the rosemary with a formal nod that the herb vendor returned with equal gravity. She negotiated him down 20 cents. She always does. He always lets her. It's been their arrangement for about 2 years. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "She knows where she belongs," she said. It wasn't a simple observation. It had a weight to it that Lucas recognized, the weight of someone saying something about themselves through the language of someone else. He looked at her. "Do you?" She considered the question the way she considered things that required honesty rather than reflex. "More than I did," she said. "That's progress." Lily came back with the rosemary held in both hands like something ceremonial. "He said hi," she told Victoria. "His name is Franklin. He has a dog named Biscuit, but the dog isn't allowed at the market." "That seems like a significant absence," Victoria said. "I think so too," Lily said with complete seriousness. Then she handed Victoria the rosemary. You carry it. Your bag is bigger. Victoria accepted the rosemary. She stood holding it in the middle of the Saturday market, in the sensible shoes with the clean blue sky above and the ordinary noise of vendors and browsers and children all around her, and the expression on her face was the one Lucas had been watching develop over the preceding months. The expression of a person who had spent a very long time in the wrong rooms, finally understanding what the right one felt like. He didn't remark on it. Some things are better witnessed than named. But the spring initiative launched in April, and Victoria disappeared into it in the way she disappeared into work that mattered, fully, with the specific intensity of someone who has decided that this particular thing is worth the full expenditure of herself. Lucas saw her less those 3 weeks. They talked on the phone most evenings, short calls that were less about conversation and more about the simple function of checking in, the equivalent of leaving a light on. She told him about the hospital in the 2nd District, the one with the funding gap that had been the thorniest problem, and how the gap had finally closed after a negotiation that had taken 4 months and left her with a specific contempt for a particular city health board member that she described in terms that were precise and uncharitable and entirely deserved. He told her about Lily's school project, a presentation on ecosystems that Lily had illustrated herself, with considerable artistic confidence and questionable biological accuracy, featuring a polar bear in a rainforest that Lily defended on the grounds that it could have gotten lost. The polar bear could have gotten lost, Victoria repeated, on the phone, with the tired, flat amusement of someone at the end of a very long day. Her argument was persuasive, Lucas said. The teacher gave her a B+. The polar bear got her a B+. The polar bear and the quality of the hand-lettered title, apparently. She used a font the teacher described as unusually sophisticated for 3rd grade. Victoria laughed, and the sound of it came through the phone with a warmth that made the distance between them feel like a temporary condition rather than a permanent state, which was, he supposed, the whole point of phone calls. How are you actually? He asked. Tired, she said. The real kind. Not the performing kind. The real kind means it's going well. It means 3 things got resolved today that I thought would take another month, she said. And now I'm sitting in the car outside the hotel eating a sandwich because I haven't eaten since this morning, and room service takes 40 minutes, and I can't wait 40 minutes. What kind of sandwich? Turkey. It's terrible. Is there mustard? There should be mustard. There isn't mustard. That's the problem, he said. That's definitely the problem, she agreed. They talked for another 20 minutes, about nothing specifically important, while she ate the sandwich without mustard in the back of the car outside a hotel in a city that wasn't theirs. And he sat on the couch in the apartment with the television on mute and Lily's ecosystem project spread across the coffee table, and the ordinary small geography of 2 people's separate evenings briefly occupied the same space through the medium of a phone call. When they said goodbye, she said, "Tell Lily the polar bear is my favorite part." "She'll want that in writing," he said. "I'll send a formal note," Victoria said. "On foundation letterhead. She'll frame it." "Good," Victoria said. And she hung up, and he sat for a moment with the phone in his hand and the quiet around him that had stopped being the heavy kind. And he thought that there was something in the accumulation of phone calls like this one, the unremarkable, unmemorable, logistically boring kind, that was the actual substance of what people called love, if you stripped away the dramatic version and looked at what remained. It was this: mustard, polar bears, leaving a light on. Lily asked her question in May. They were at the kitchen table after dinner, the 3 of them, which had become a regular Sunday configuration without anyone specifically declaring it so. And Lily had been quieter than usual through the meal, the particular quiet of a child who has been carrying a question for a while and is working up the architecture of it. Lucas had noticed. Victoria had also noticed. He could tell by the way she'd left conversational space open without appearing to, the subtle hospitality of someone making room. Lily put her fork down with the careful precision of someone about to say something deliberate. "Are you going to live here?" she asked Victoria. The kitchen absorbed the question. Lucas put his own fork down. Victoria looked at Lily directly, not performing calm, not reaching for the deflecting adult language that would have managed the moment rather than met it. "Not right now," she said. "I have my own apartment, but I'm here a lot." Lily considered this. "Like how much is a lot?" "Most Sundays, some weekdays, when your dad needs backup." "He burns the garlic bread," Lily said. "He does," Victoria confirmed. Every time. I've accepted it, Lily said. So have I, Victoria said. Lily was quiet for a moment, processing something. Then, my friend Sophie has a stepmom. Sophie says it was weird at first. The kitchen was very still. Was it weird for you? Lily asked. When you started coming here? Victoria held Lily's gaze. A little, she said, but not in a bad way. Sometimes things feel new and unfamiliar, and that's not the same as wrong. That's what Dad says about new foods, Lily said. Your dad is occasionally right about things, Victoria said. Occasionally, Lily agreed with a sideways look at Lucas that contained multitudes. Lucas looked at his daughter, this person he had made and lost and rebuilt himself around, this small, precise creature with her font opinions and her market negotiations and her polar bears in rainforests, this child who had watched him grieve and had refused to let her own grief become invisible, and who had, in the end, opened the door of this apartment and this table and this life to someone new with the simple, natural grace of someone who had never learned to be small about love. Does it bother you? He asked her. Victoria being here. Lily looked at him like this was a deeply strange question. No, she said, with the tone of someone explaining something obvious. She brought me the atlas. The atlas was one time, Victoria said. It was a good atlas, Lily said. And you know about reindeer. I know they exist in Norway, Victoria said. That's the extent of my expertise. That's more than Dad knows. Your dad knows other things. He knows about bridges, Lily said. Bridges are important, Victoria said. They keep you from falling, Lily said, with the authority of a child who has recently learned this fact and is pleased by it. Then she picked her fork back up, apparently satisfied, and returned to her dinner with the completeness of someone who had gotten the information she needed and was ready to move on. Lucas looked at Victoria across the table. Victoria looked back at him. Neither of them said anything because the moment was doing all its own work and adding words would only have gotten in the way. After dinner, while Lily was in the bath, Lucas stood at the sink doing the dishes and Victoria sat at the table with her coffee, and neither of them spoke for a while, and the quiet was the fullest kind. Not empty, but loaded with everything the evening had contained. She's going to be all right, Victoria said, finally. She was always going to be all right, Lucas said. She's built differently than most people. She gets it from her father. He turned from the sink. That's generous. It's accurate, Victoria said. You can refuse it if you want. It's still accurate. He turned back to the dishes. She asked the question I didn't know how to ask, he said. The "are you going to be here" question. I know, Victoria said. And? She was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, settling. There was a difference, and he knew it by now. I'm going to be here, she said, in the ways that are right, at the pace that's right. I'm not going anywhere. A pause. That's the answer to the question you didn't ask. Lily asked it better than I would have, he said. Lily asks everything better than most people would, Victoria said. She doesn't have the adult habit of dressing things up. He smiled at the sink. She got that from her mother. The mention of Claire sat in the room gently, without jagged edges, the way it did now, most of the time, after 3 years of learning how to carry it. The grief had not disappeared, and it would not. It had simply become part of the architecture rather than the emergency, the way the load-bearing walls are always there even when you've stopped thinking about them. Tell me something, her, Victoria said. Claire. He thought about it. She corrected people's grammar, he said. Not meanly, but reflexively, like she couldn't help it. She'd apologize immediately after, which somehow made it worse because the apology confirmed she'd done it on purpose, at least enough to notice. He paused. She'd have had a lot of opinions about the comment sections. Probably unprintable ones, Victoria said. Mostly, he agreed. She had a vocabulary she deployed selectively. He dried his hands on the dish towel. She would have liked you, he said. It came out simply, without weight or strangeness, just true. She didn't like people who performed. She had a very fast read on the real versus the presentation. Victoria received this. Not with deflection, not with an overmanaged response. Just received it, the way you receive something that is offered plainly. That means something, she said, coming from you. It's true, he said. I know, she said. That's why it means something. Oh, the summer moved through the way summers do when your life is organized around a child's schedule. with camps and humidity and the specific exhaustion of a single parent managing August, which was always the hardest month, the end of summer restlessness that hit Lily at around the third week and turned her from a manageable person into a faintly volcanic one. Lucas navigated it the way he navigated it every year, with patience he had to consciously replenish, and the occasional afternoon at the public pool where they both floated in the lane water and didn't talk for a while, which was the most efficient reset either of them had found. Victoria came to the pool once. She sat in the bleacher seats in a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses and watched Lily teach herself to dive from the low board with the particular dogged repetition of someone who has decided to master something and will not stop until they have. She came down the steps when Lily achieved something close to an actual dive, still more of a controlled fall than a dive in the technical sense, but with commitment. And Lily surfaced from the water and looked up at the bleachers with an expression of pure, unfiltered satisfaction. "Did you see that?" Lily shouted. "I saw it," Victoria called back. "I'm going to do it better tomorrow." "I believe you," Victoria said. Lucas, treading water in the lane beside her, said nothing. He was watching Victoria watch his daughter, and there was something in Victoria's face that was private and significant and not his to interpret. It was hers, whatever was moving through her in that moment, whatever the sight of Lily surfacing from the water with that expression was landing on inside her. He thought about what she'd said months ago in the cafe on Mercer Street, that the apartment, for all its beauty, was very quiet at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night. He thought about the weight of that silence, which he had understood because he'd carried his own version of it. He thought about all the things you can construct in a life that still leave those specific hours unfilled. And he thought about the fact that she was sitting in the bleachers of a public pool in August, in a hat, watching a 9-year-old attempt to dive. Not because it was impressive, not because it served any purpose in the architecture of her professional life or her public reputation or the management of her image. Because she wanted to be there. Because being there was the thing. There are people who understand that the ordinary moments are the whole point, and there are people who spend their lives waiting for the significant ones. And Victoria Ashford had arrived at 50 knowing she'd been doing the second thing, and had, with the same precision she brought to everything else, decided to stop. He loved her for that decision. He hadn't said so yet, not in those words, and the right moment had not yet arrived. Or rather, the moment had arrived several times and he'd let it pass because saying it would make it permanent in a way that still carried some residual fear. The specific fear of a man who knows what it costs to lose the permanent things. He said it in September. Not dramatically, not in the gallery with the painting as backdrop, not at a restaurant with the right lighting. He said it on the couch, on a Wednesday evening, with Lily at Renata's and the television on and the remains of a takeout dinner on the coffee table, and Victoria sitting beside him, with her feet tucked under her reading, something on her tablet, and the apartment around them doing its ordinary evening thing. He said, "I love you." She looked up from the tablet. "I've been meaning to say it for a while," he said. "I keep finding reasons to wait for the right moment, which is a thing I do when I'm scared of something, and I've decided to stop doing that." Victoria looked at him. She closed the tablet. She did not look away, and she did not manage her response. "I know," she said. "I love you too." Then, "I've also been waiting for the right moment, for similar reasons." "We're the same kind of coward," he said. "Structural engineers and philanthropists," she said. "We require load-bearing evidence before we commit." "Occupational hazard. Deeply inconvenient," she agreed. Then she reached over and took his hand the way she'd taken it at the kitchen table in February, without ceremony, just the simple human act of taking a hand, and they sat with the television on and the takeout containers on the table, and the ordinary Wednesday evening proceeding exactly as ordinary Wednesday evenings do. When two people have finally said the true thing and found it was not as difficult as all the months of not saying it had made it seem. It was Richard Okafor who told Victoria, in October, that the board had formally agreed to stop treating her personal life as a governance concern. He delivered the information at a quarterly meeting, at the end of the agenda, with the brisk efficiency of someone resolving a matter that should not have required resolution in the first place. He had, apparently, spent 3 months building the internal consensus, quietly and without fanfare, in the way that genuinely effective people build things, below the noise, with patience, and with the understanding that you don't announce a foundation being laid, you simply lay it. Victoria thanked him, with the particular warmth she reserved for people who did the right thing without needing credit for it. He's a good man, she told Lucas that evening. You said that about him before, Lucas said. He keeps confirming it, she said. Some people are consistent. How does that feel? The bored. She thought about it. Like a door I didn't realize was still partly closed, she said. And now it's open. And the difference isn't dramatic, but it's real. He understood. The removal of an obstacle is not the same as the presence of a good thing, but it clears the space for the good thing to occupy without resistance. And that clearing has its own value, quiet and foundational. Diana had been doing her own form of clearing. It had not been fast and it had not been linear. Diana was not built for linear. But over the months, it had been genuine. She had called Lucas twice, ostensibly about Victoria's upcoming birthday, and then about a gallery event she was organizing. And both times, the conversation had moved past the stated purpose into something more honest. She had asked about Lily with real interest. She had offered, during the second call, without preamble or self-congratulation, that she had been wrong in the gallery and that she was the kind of person who found it difficult to say so, but was trying to be less that kind of person. Lucas had said, "You said so in the gallery. That counted." "It counted as the beginning," Diana said. "I want it to count as more than the beginning." "Then keep going," he said. "That's how it counts as more." She had. By the time November came around, the anniversary of the Meridian Mixer, though neither of them marked it explicitly, Diana and Lucas had reached the particular rapport of two people who had met badly and decided, against the initial evidence, to become something more useful to each other. Not close friends? Not yet. But the real kind of not yet. The kind with a direction. Victoria posted the painting in November. Not a photograph of the painting itself, a photograph she'd taken herself, with her phone, slightly imperfect in the way. Phone photographs are when the person taking them is not thinking about composition, but about something else. The painting in the background of the gallery, visible over her shoulder, the woman in the doorway, small but clear. And beneath it, one sentence. Some hearts aren't looking to be rescued. They're waiting for someone brave enough to walk beside them. She had not consulted Lucas before posting it. She had not consulted Sandra. She had simply posted it because it was true, and because she had decided that the things that were true deserved to occupy the space that the assumptions had been occupying, and that the best response to a year of other people's narratives was a single sentence of her own. The response was large and varied, and she read almost none of it. Sandra called. Diana texted a single word, "Good." Richard sent an email with the subject line noted and nothing in the body, which Victoria interpreted correctly as approval. Lucas saw it and called her. "You didn't tell me," he said. "I didn't ask permission," she said. "Was that wrong?" "No," he said. "I just want to know if you're all right." "I'm fine," she said. "Better than fine." A pause. It felt like closing a door that had been open too long. "You know how drafts work." "The structural explanation again," he said. "It's the useful framework," she said. He smiled. "You're all right." "Yes," she said. "I am." 2 years after the Meridian Mixer, on a Saturday in November when the weather had committed to the full cold without apology, Lucas brought Victoria back to the gallery on Ashworth Lane. He had told her only that he wanted to show her something. She had not pressed for details, because she had learned, over 2 years, that Lucas's version of a plan was not the kind that benefited from advanced scrutiny. He was not a man who built to a blueprint so much as a man who built towards something he could feel, adjusting as he went, which was either maddening or reassuring depending on the day, and had become over time almost entirely the latter. Lily was there when they arrived, which was the first thing that told Victoria this was something. Lily was standing near the woman in the doorway, painting in her good coat, the charcoal one that made her look older than 9, holding the small cloth bear who had been renamed Walter after a period of consideration that Lucas maintained had taken longer than any naming process should. She was trying to look casual and succeeding about as well as a 9-year-old trying to look casual ever succeeds. "Hi," Lily said. "Hello," Victoria said, looking between Lily and Lucas. "Dad said we were coming to see the gallery," Lily said, in the voice of someone repeating an officially approved explanation. "We are," Lucas said. "We're also doing something else," Lily said. "Lily," Lucas said. "I didn't say what," Lily said reasonably. "I just said also." Victoria looked at Lucas. His expression was the one she'd come to know as the outer surface of something he was feeling strongly, but managing carefully. Not controlled, not suppressed, just held. The way you hold something you don't want to drop. He led her to the painting. She stood before the woman in the doorway, the woman she'd bought in September of last year, the woman walking through without knowing what was on the other side, and looked at it the way she always looked at it, with the specific quality of attention she gave to things that meant something real. The warm gallery light was the same as it always was. The painting was the same as it always was. She was not the same as she'd been when she bought it, which was entirely the point. She heard Lucas move behind her. She heard the small sound that is almost no sound at all, of someone lowering themselves to one knee on a gallery floor, and she turned before she'd decided to turn, which was how she always moved toward the things that mattered. He was looking up at her with the expression she associated with the moments he was most completely himself. Not the managed version or the careful version or the version that had learned to protect itself, but the actual man, present and certain and not entirely without fear and doing it anyway. Lily, beside him, had her hands clasped in front of her with the rigid excitement of a child who has been told to be calm and is doing her absolute best, which was not very calm at all. Lucas said, "I want to ask you something, and I want to ask it the right way, which means, honestly, without it being more or less than it is." He paused. "On the night I met you, I moved a chair across a room because it was the right thing to do, and I didn't stop to calculate whether it would cost me anything. That was the truest thing I've done in a long time." He looked up at her steadily. "Everything since then has been the same kind of true. The dinners and the market and Harlow's and Diana and Richard and the pool and the Wednesday evenings and the garlic bread. All of it." He paused. "I want to keep doing it. All of it. For as long as you'll let me." He reached into his coat pocket. The ring was not extravagant. It was the kind of ring a structural engineer chooses when he is being honest about who he is. Clean lines, good quality, no excess. It caught the gallery light in the straightforward way of things that don't need to perform. Victoria looked at it. Then she looked at Lily, who had abandoned all pretense of calm and was now vibrating slightly. Then she looked at Lucas. She had spent her adult life in rooms where the terms were always visible, where the people across the table from her had legible agendas and comprehensible motives, where she could read the shape of what someone wanted from her before they finished speaking. She had learned to be very good at that reading. It was, in its way, a form of self-protection. She had never been able to read Lucas Carter that way, and it had unsettled her badly in the beginning, and she had come to understand over 2 years that what had unsettled her was not the absence of legibility, but the presence of something she'd stopped expecting to find, a person who wanted exactly what he said he wanted. Nothing underneath, nothing converted from something else, just the thing itself. "If no one had been watching," she said it the way you say something that has been waiting a long time to be said. "That night, if no one had been watching, would you still have moved the chair?" He looked at her without hesitation. "Yes," he said. "I would have done it for you." She had not planned to cry. She was not a person who planned to cry and then did it on schedule, which was one of the things she'd learned about herself over 50 years. She cried at the unexpected things, the small true ones, not the grand gestures. It was Lily, across from her, pressing her lips together and failing entirely to hold back her own expression, that broke it. And it was Lucas's face, looking up at her with the complete, unreserved truth of a man who had loved and lost and rebuilt and arrived at this gallery floor and was not afraid. "Yes," Victoria said. Lily made a sound that was not a word. Lucas stood, and the ring went on, and Lily crashed into both of them with the full-body impact of a 9-year-old who has been waiting for this moment and is not interested in a gradual approach. The three of them stood in front of the woman in the doorway in the warm light of the gallery, in the imperfect, tangled way of people who are not performing for anyone. There were no photographers. There was no social media. There was Pete, the building manager, who appeared from somewhere with a bottle of sparkling water because it was what he had, and who poured it into paper cups with the gravity of a man officiating something, which, in his way, he was. Diana had been told. She was not there because she had understood, when Lucas had called her the previous week, that this was something for the three of them. And Diana, for all her fierce love and her difficult initial entry into the story, understood by now that some rooms held exactly the people they needed to hold. She sent a text to Victoria at 7:15 that evening that said simply, "Well?" Victoria replied with a photograph. The ring, slightly out of focus, taken with the phone in the way Lucas had criticized gently on the way home as compositionally ambitious. Beside it, out of frame but audible in the text that followed, Lily's voice. "Send her the one with Walter." The second photograph showed Walter the bear, held up by Lily toward the camera, with his expression of cloth bear neutrality that somehow read, in the context, as thoroughly approving. Diana sent back, "Walter has excellent judgment." "He does," Victoria replied. She put the phone away and looked at the two people across the restaurant table. Lucas, who had put on the gray suit again for the occasion, and looked, she had told him, exactly like himself, which was the point. And Lily, who had ordered pasta with the considered deliberation of someone who knows their own mind, and had then immediately spilled some of it, and was dealing with this with the equanimity of someone for whom the gap between the ideal and the actual had long since stopped being a catastrophe. Victoria thought about the things you cannot plan for, and the things you cannot protect yourself from, and the things you cannot build your way around. She thought about a woman in a painting walking through a doorway into light that gave no information. She thought about a ballroom full of people who had already decided what something meant. She thought about a chair being carried across a room. She thought about what it had cost her, the long, careful years of managing everything, and what it had given her, and how the giving and the costing were not in balance, had never been in balance, and how the imbalance had been the thing she'd been living inside for so long she'd stopped seeing it as imbalance and started seeing it as the natural state of things. And she thought about how you don't know what the natural state of things is until something comes along that isn't it. And then the contrast tells you everything. This was the contrast. This restaurant, this pasta, with the small catastrophe of the spilled sauce, this man in the gray suit, this child who had renamed her bear and was right to. This was the thing that the other thing had not been, and the difference between them was not subtle, and she was done pretending it was. She had not been rescued. That was the thing people got wrong about stories like theirs, if stories like theirs were even a category. The assumption that a woman of a certain age and a certain wealth being loved by a younger man must be a transaction, must be a rescue, must involve a before and after where someone saves someone else. She had not been saved. She had not been found by someone who completed her. She had been walking through a doorway of her own choosing, and she had encountered someone walking in the same direction, and they had looked at each other and decided, not impulsively, not dramatically, not without the full weight of everything they were each carrying, to walk the same way for a while. And the while had become a life. That was all it was. That was the whole of it. And anyone who had been looking for the other version, the rescue, the transformation, the grand reinvention, would have been disappointed by how ordinary it looked from the outside. Two adults and a 9-year-old in a restaurant on a November Saturday, talking about pasta and Walter the bear and whether the Caldwell Street Market would have the honey booth next week or had already closed for the season. It looked ordinary because it was ordinary. And ordinary, Victoria Ashford had come to understand, at 52 years old, in the warm light of an unremarkable restaurant on an unremarkable street in a city that had briefly made them a headline and then moved on to other business, was the rarest thing on earth. She had spent decades surrounded by the exceptional addresses, and the exceptional rooms, and the exceptional events, and the exceptional access. She had been in the company of remarkable people doing remarkable things, and had never once sat back and thought, this is enough. She thought it now. Lily had finished the pasta, spill and all, and was explaining to Lucas with considerable force that Walter deserved a seat at the table and not a position on the empty chair beside her, which she felt was disrespectful to Walter's status as a named entity. Lucas was engaging with this argument with the complete seriousness it deserved, which was to say total seriousness, because Lily's arguments deserved no less. Victoria watched them and thought, this is enough. Not as resignation, not as settling, as the thing itself, the full enough, the real enough, the kind of enough that doesn't leave a gap at the edges. Outside the restaurant, the November city moved through its evening, indifferent and alive. The cold had found its depth. The season had committed. The farmer's market was closed for the winter on Caldwell Street, and the honey booth was packed away, and the herb vendor named Franklin had taken his Rosemary and his dog named Biscuit and gone home until spring. Spring would come again. It always did, in pieces. the way a person comes back to themselves after a long, difficult time. Not all at once, but steadily and with intention and with the particular stubbornness of things that have decided to live. Some things you don't plan, some things you don't earn exactly or deserve in any transactional sense. Some things arrive disguised as the smallest possible moment. A chair being lifted, a decision made before it's been fully thought through. The instinct of a decent person responding to a small cruelty in a crowded room. And you either follow them or you don't. Lucas Carter had followed it. So had she. That was the story. Not the photographs or the comment sections or the age difference or the money or the years of complicated arrival. The story was two people who had both spent a long time being careful in the wrong direction, who had met at the exact moment when the exhaustion of that caution had finally outweighed the fear of what came after. And what came after was this. Lily, triumphant, had placed Walter on the table beside her water glass, where the bear sat with his characteristic dignity, observing the proceedings. "He can see better from here," Lily said. "Fair enough," Lucas said. Victoria reached over and adjusted Walter's angle slightly, so that the bear faced the center of the table rather than the wall. "Better?" she asked Lily. Lily assessed. "Better," she confirmed. The three of them sat in the warm light of the ordinary evening, and outside the city moved on, and inside there was pasta and a cloth bear named Walter, and a ring on a finger and a man in a gray suit and a child who had opened the door without being asked, because she was built that way, and had always been that way, had always been the kind of person who understood that some things are worth making room for. She had learned it, Lucas thought, from watching him try. And he had learned it, if he was being fully honest with himself, from her. The smallest people teach us the largest things, and we spend our whole lives being too busy to notice, and then one day we do, and the noticing changes everything. That was the lesson. That was the only one that mattered. Carry the chair, walk through the door, stay at the table. Everything else follows.